Anybody who has studied the life and subsequent death of Alexander the Great will give you the same reason as to why his empire was split among his generals and fought over for the next 300 years after his death. The answer they will give is that Alexander's empire collapsed due to his lack of an heir, as his only son was still a fetus inside the belly of his mother. But what if this statement is incorrect? What if Alexander already had a son and a possible heir? This is the story of Heraclius of Macedon, the supposed bastard son of Alexander the Great. But to tell the story of Heraclius of Macedon, we first must tell the story of his mother. His mother's name was Barsine. She was the daughter of a Persian satrap of Phrygia, a man named Artiobazus. Her own mother was an unnamed Rhodian woman, who was the sister of the two premier mercenaries of their day, Mentor and Memnon of Rhodes. Quite disgustingly, her first marriage was to her uncle, Mentor of Rhodes. She likely married Mentor while she was just a teenager. After 2 years of being appointed to the position of satrap of the Asiatic coast by the Persian king Artaxerxes III, Mentor would die in 340 BC, just 6 years before Alexander's infamous Persian campaign. He left behind both his satrapy and his widowed niece-wife, both of which were promptly given to his brother, Memnon of Rhodes. Memnon actually met and spoke to Alexander while he was in Macedon during a brief exile. When Alexander invaded Persia in 334 BC, he dealt a devastating blow to the Achaemenids at the Battle of the Granicus River. After this defeat, it would be Memnon who was given command of the Persian army in order to stop this Macedonian king. After the Battle of the Granicus River, in which Memnon was present at, the now lead commander of the Persian army decided that the best offense against Alexander is a good defense. To ensure this defense, Memnon chose to make his stand at the city of Halicarnassus. The walls of the city were not only thick, but also featured multi-layers. After a brief siege, the city would fall to Alexander. Memnon, in a final act of vengeance, ordered for the city to be set ablaze, while he and his army retreated to their ships. Memnon, seeing that the war on land was a lost cause, turned his attention to the islands of the Aegean Sea. Persia still held the largest and most capable navy in the area, and Memnon intended to use it. He took the island of Chios, then began a campaign on the island of Lesbos. This island would prove to be a tougher nut to crack. Despite this, Memnon captured most of the island by 333 BC. The last remaining stronghold on Lesbos was the fortified city of Mytilene, the current capital of modern-day Lesbos. Memnon of Rhodes would die during this siege, leaving his niece-wife, Barsine, a widow for the second time in her young life. But Barsine wasn't on campaign with Memnon, as she was already a hostage under King Darius III of Persia. After the 333 Battle of Issus between Alexander and Darius, Darius ran east to lick his wounds. He would leave behind his own family to the Macedonian, and Darius also left behind Barsine, who was currently in the city of Damascus. In 332 BC, Damascus would come under the fold of Alexander, and, if the sources are to be believed, Barsine meets him for the very first time. Apparently, she becomes his mistress shortly after the city falls into Macedonian hands. Most historians will argue that Heraclius was conceived here, but unless her pregnancy lasted for 5 years, this cannot be true. It is not until much further into Alexander's campaign that Heraclius is conceived. Presumably, as we have no sources on Barsine, she either goes back to her home in Phrygia, stays in Damascus, or simply stays with the Macedonian army as Alexander continues his campaign. After his conquest of the Levant and Egypt, Alexander pushes east, in the hunt for Darius III. The last battle that Darius had any chance against Alexander was in 331 BC, at the Battle of Gaugamela, in which he would lose, and in his common fashion, would run away. Not many men remained on the side of the once all-powerful Achaemenid Empire, and even less officers, generals, and now, landless governors. But one former governor that would remain viciously loyal to Darius until his end was Artiobazus II, the father of Barsine. After King Darius was assassinated, most likely by one of his own loyal generals, Bessus, Artiobazus finally abandons the Persian cause. Alexander, seeing his unwavering sense of loyalty, decides to let him live, and in 330 BC, even grants him a satrapy to govern over. This satrapy was Bactria, located in modern-day Afghanistan and largely under the control of Bessus, who declared himself to be the successor of King Darius. If Barsine did accompany Alexander's army, then it is right here that she is reunited with her father. And if she did not accompany Alexander, then I still find it to be highly likely that she would take the long journey to live with him, as she had no husband after the death of Memnon and hadn't seen her father in over 5 years. From 329 to 327 BC, Alexander worked to defeat Bessus and conquer Bactria, finding success and adding to the satrapy of Artabazus. And it is here, if Barcine was here, where Heracles of Macedon would be conceived. If she lived with her father, then she would have easy access to Alexander, leading to their supposed extracurricular activities. The date of his conception is likely sometime in 328 BC, as Artabazus dies in that same year. Barcine likely joins or rejoins Alexander's army, or she simply returns west by herself, taking with her the unborn son of the most powerful man in the world. Heracles of Macedon, the believed to be bastard son of Alexander the Great, was born in 327 BC. The exact location of his birth is unknown, although we do know where Heracles grew up, that being the city of Pergamon, located directly to the south of his grandfather's old Persian satrapy of Phrygia. His very name is an attempt at legitimizing the boy as the son of Alexander, as Alexander's own Macedonian dynasty claims descent from that of the Greek demigod Heracles, better known presently as Hercules. Nothing is mentioned of Heracles, or even his mother, until 324 BC. Through this, we can assume that he grew up as an ordinary, yet wealthy noble. If Barcine told her son who her father really was, then we don't know about it. In 324 BC, at the city of Susa, Alexander decides to marry off his generals to the nobility of Persia that they had just got done conquering. This event is called the Susa Weddings, and features one wedding between one of Alexander's officers, a man named Nerches, and the daughter of Barcine, half-sister of Heracles of Macedon. This daughter is unnamed, but she is the inbred child of her first uncle husband Mentor of Rhodes. This marriage came just in time, and ensured the protection of Heracles, as his father would die not long after the Susa weddings in 323 BC. While the circumstances surrounding the cause of Alexander's death will forever be debated, the events directly following his death are well known and commonly referred to as the Wars of the Diadochi, as his generals and other prominent men in his empire would split the conquered land amongst themselves and endlessly fight over this land. Apparently when Alexander died, Nerches, who would now be half-brother-in-law to Heracles, declared for the rightful succession to pass on to this bastard boy, at the age of only 5 years old. Just think about how much bloodshed and carnage could have been spared if everybody just agreed with Nerches. But of course, nobody agreed with him, and he was finally forced to pick a real side or face certain death. So, he joined with Alexander's former general, Antigonus. His last mention is in 312 BC. Then, Nerches disappears from history, in order to write his very own history. That's right, Nerches was something of a historian, although his book, called the Indica, no, not that Indica, yes, that Indica, has been lost. While this book was most likely an autobiography about his time in India, the fact that he was a historian, although one with a bias, somewhat adds to the credibility of his claim that Heracles was the true son of Alexander. It seemed like General Antigonus, whose domain Pergamon fell under, decided to preserve the life of Heracles, keeping him around as a possible pawn that he could conveniently place directly onto the throne of Macedon. Under Antigonus, Barcine and Heracles managed to stay safe, despite the Wars of the Diadochi raging around them. That is, until 310 BC. After Roxana, the widowed Bactrian wife of Alexander the Great, was captured, her son, the 14-year-old legitimate son of Alexander, Alexander IV, was held as a hostage by General Cassander. Now both of Alexander's descendants were under Diadochi hands. They could end the 400-year line of Argos and control everything that Alexander had conquered. However, Antigonus used this child of his former king as a simple bargaining chip. In 309 BC, to secure his alliance with Polyperchon, Heracles is sent to Polyperchon. The following events have historians split. Both Alexander IV and Heracles are murdered, along with their mothers, close to the same time in 309 BC. The order in which they were assassinated has been disputed. Personally, I feel as though Polyperchon murdered Heracles first, as he was the one who received Heracles like some sort of gift. I believe that he accepted a bribe from Cassander, then, after Cassander confirmed the death of Heracles, he killed Alexander IV, ending the dynasty of Argos. There are only two sources that even mention Heracles, that being Plutarch and Justin. The holes in Barcine and Heracles' story cannot be ignored. The evidence is circumstantial at best, but still evidence nonetheless. The only two that can know for certain if this is Alexander's son is Alexander himself and Barcine. The timeline makes sense. Personally, I do believe that this boy was the son of Alexander the Great.